Keith W. Jacobs, I think in 1974, this psychologist had made an experiment in his paper by putting a group of people in a red room. And after that, what they found was that they were highly stimulated and their heart rates were higher, their perceptual awareness became higher. And he did that experiment with all the primary colors, and we're going to get to that.
He saw that red is more stimulating than yellow. Yellow is more stimulating than blue.
But the essence of it is that he showed the impact of color in our brain. I'm gonna now jump into color, and that's what's gonna be our focus for today's workshop. And I'm gonna always, of course, start with the color wheel, and this is important to kind of keep in mind that color has two basic parts. One is that it's got its scientific side. For a designer, it's important to know some terminologies and some words that allows us to identify specific aspects of color. I'll go into that very briefly. And of course, there's the meaning and psychology of color. So Keith W. Jacobs, I think in 1974, this psychologist had made an experiment in his paper by putting a group of people in a red room. And after that, what they found was that they were highly stimulated and their heart rates were higher, their perceptual awareness became higher. And he did that experiment with all the primary colors, and we're going to get to that. Primary colors are actually where their black dots are, the red, blue and yellow. He saw that red is more stimulating than blue. But the essence of it is that he showed the impact of color in our brain. Also, I think Richard Kula also did an experiment on how basically colors affect our ECG readings. It affects our heart rate as well. So why I'm saying that is to kind of tell you that color has been a age-old concept that has affected us much before these people did these experiments, and it has had great impact on us. But also keep in mind there's the brain part of it, but then there's the meaning part of it, and that's important to note because people are from different cultures. People can be from different ages. They have different experiences. For example, red has few different connotations in the West or in India or in Japan. It has some nuances, these colors. So it's important always to kind of do a little bit of background research on who I'm making the design for, because that helps us be more intentional with our color. The color wheel. The color wheel is again a support for all designers. It helps us to create color combinations mainly, but it also gives it to us straight. It tells us what are the primary colors, which is red, blue and yellow. The primary colors are colors. Yes, you get secondary colors by mixing them. But also more importantly, primary colors are colors that you can't get by mixing other colors. So they are base colors. You get other colors from those colors, right? So if I mix these colors together, we get secondary colors. And secondary colors are on the color wheel. Secondary colors are colors between the two primary colors, right? So these are secondary colors, right? And then there are tertiary. Tertiary colors are colors you get by mixing secondary colors together, right? If I use primary colors, they are highly stimulating. So I know that they are very high contrast. But if I use tertiary colors and secondary colors, I'm pulling it back. And that's important to know, the intensity I want to put in my design. But the color wheel also helps us create color combinations, and that's really helpful when a designer is trying to figure out what color am I going to choose for my design, for my work. Of course, the color wheel helps on one side, but also knowing my audience is a key part. If I'm making a design for the chic, for my audience who goes to only Chanel and only Zara, that's the people who want to buy my product, then it gives me an idea of what that color palette could look like. And if I'm doing, say for instance, a food app that's only in Japan, only for Japanese people, it's an app that's national to Japan, then that gives me another kind of connotation on how that app color could be, so that it resonates with the people for whom it is. So there are different kinds of color combinations, of course. The first one that people talk about is complementary colors. Complementary colors, also there's a technical behind it. Complementary colors are colors that are opposite to each other on the color wheel, right? So these are complementary colors. This and this are complementary colors. Why would I choose complementary colors? Because if you just look at the color wheel, you know that complementary colors are colors that will create high contrast in my design, because they are opposite to each other on the color wheel. Then there's analogous. Analogous colors are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So we are creating much more of a subdued, more calmer tone because they are so close to each other, right? So these are analogous colors. These are analogous colors. So now I'm pulling back the contrast. I'm not giving you so much of difference. I'm giving you more of the same. Then we have are triadic. If I create a triangle, a equal triangle on the color wheels, I have a triadic color combination, right? They make a triangle on the color wheel. And again, what does that give me? When we do that, you can already see we have two complementary complementary colors with one punchy color, right? So it kind of gives me, okay, we have kind of a similar tone, but we have also something with which I can make a punch on the design. And then of course the last one is called tetradic, T-E-T-R-A-D-I-C, tetradic, tetra, 4. If I create a shape of like this, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4 colors that we are using. It's kind of some ways, if I don't know where to start, I can always go back to the color wheel, take some of these color combinations and start my design. Like I told you, there are also technical terms. I'm not going to go too much into it, but it's important to kind of know some of these words, and I'm sure these words will be different in different languages. So it's important to kind of note that. I'm only doing it in English here, but these kind of words help us understand what we are looking at. It brings the science behind what we are doing. It gives us a structure. Like I said, I'm going back to the definition that we are creating meaning, and that meaning has to fit in a structure. So we need to know the principles, we need to know the technicalities so that we can put the meaning in the most effective, intentional way for the viewer, right? And we can really pack a punch in the design. Hue is basically the purest form of the color. So that's all it means, right? The hue of red is how we look at red from our eyes. Value is the lightness or the darkness of the color. So if I have like a red here, if I decrease the value, it's going to go like slowly, it's going to become dimmer and dimmer to where it's white. So if I have a slider and the middle is red, pure red, if I move it this way, decreasing the value, it will become white at the end. And if I move it that way, it will become black, completely dark. So it's the lightness and the darkness of color. Chroma is again just basically the main values of color, right? It's again the purest form, and it's basically kind of just the way red is in a certain color palette. Saturation is the intensity of the color, which means if I decrease and increase the intensity, then the amount of black or white in the color is decreasing and increasing, and I'll tell you more about it. Tint is what we get when we add white to a color, right? So we have red. The more I keep adding white, I get more tints of that color. Shade is what I get of a color when I keep adding black to that color. So I have a color, I keep adding black, it's gonna get darker, 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 darker till it's black. And tints and shades, again, obviously, you know now I can create contrast by manipulating those things. Tone is the amount of gray I put in a color, right? I have a color and then I keep putting gray and I get different tones of that color. And color palette at the end, which is important, and I think we should probably implement that today. Color palette is a set of colors that I choose to use in my design. I don't go away from that. How a designer keeps it is that they have these squares and they put different kinds of colors in them by going into the color wheel and selecting 4 or 5 colors, and they stick to that in their design. They don't use any other color. The function of a color palette is to create consistency in our design. But also color palette, it gives us a way to attribute colors to specific things. I can also tell myself that I have green, light green, red and light red. I can tell myself I have these 4 colors. I'm going to use only these 2 for my character. I'm going to use only this one for my background. I'm going to use only this one for my text. So it also helps me to prioritize where I want to use combinations of colors. So color palette creates a certain context and it also creates consistency in the design.